linked to the future of Zimbabwe. He says if Zimbabwe implodes, that will affect South Africa deeply. Tendai Biti, of course, was a member of the MDC and part of a power-sharing government while he was part of that party. He's now an official from the People's Democratic Party. Tendai Biti joins us in studio. Thank you for being with us. So you were held by ZANU-PF. You were arrested. You were charged with treason at one stage, insulting President Robert Mugabe. If you look back at that time and what you've seen over the last few days, could you ever imagine it?
Yes, in a way, yeah. We've always fought for the removal of President Mugabe, for the removal of ZANU-PF. But even in our wildest imagination, we couldn't have scripted the script that played out from the 14th of November 2017. The surrealness of the military moving on the ground, the surrealness of seeing tanks, seeing soldiers on national television, then the amazing scenes on Saturday, the 18th of November 2017, where hundreds and thousands of Zimbabweans just poured into the streets of Harare, of Bulawayo, in London, in New York, in Pretoria, in Joburg, in Cape Town. It was incredible. Yeah, and the irony that as the citizen was marching with the army a symbol of repression and oppression hitherto. And now, to crown it all, the resignation of Mugabe on Tuesday, the 20th of November. So it has been an extraordinary roller coaster of emotions, of feelings, which Zimbabweans have never gone through in their lives.
What would you say to South Africans who looked at this and said, very few people are supporting the outgoing president? How did it take so long? Why wait until he's 93?
Well, I think the thing about Zimbabwe, the thing about most African states north of the Limpopo, elections are very nominal. Elections are just lip service. We have electoral authoritarianism. We have a system which favors the incumbency. So for many years, for at least 20 years, we have been in the opposition, fighting Robert Mugabe, fighting his regime, and he has been propped up by the very same army that was decisive in the deciding stages of his removal from Monday, the 14th of November. But that has happened. I guess the next challenge is, how do we move forward?
It sounds like what you've been saying is that this is the same party. It's still corrupt, predatory. I think you've used those words. So Emmerson Mnangagwa coming in, formerly Mugabe's, one of his right-hand men, is that putting lipstick on a pig?
I think that what is required is to accept that what has happened. And we use the opportunity of what has happened to re-legitimize our country, re-democratize our country, and to lay the foundations of an irrevocable, irreversible path to genuine transformation. We've had fights with ZANU-PF, but at this present moment in time, ZANU-PF is both the problem and part of the solution as well. So what we are arguing as opposition is that there must be an agreed a roadmap to legitimacy. There must be an agreed transitional process. Emmerson Mnangagwa must preside over an agreed transitional process with the clear benchmarks that include, for instance, the need to maintain peace and stability, the need to ensure that there is no implosion or explosion in our country. Number two, political and institutional reform, which includes electoral reforms. Number three, much needed economic reforms, deep structural economic reforms. Number four, looking after the livelihoods of our people. Social services have collapsed, looking after the livelihoods of our people. Number five, getting back Zimbabwe as a full member of the international community, in other words, re-engagement. So these are difficult things which we have to navigate very carefully. We have to earn the trust of the international community, and we have to, someone has to pay for all these processes, because they have to be monetized and it costs a lot of money. So it's a thing that will be very difficult for one political party and one individual to do. And so I hope that wisdom will prevail and people will understand that the transition is to be managed and shared by all of us.
Well, the opposition has been very quiet, very uninvolved in what has happened. Do you think the opposition should be part of a transitional government? Would you be part of something like that?
It's not correct to say that the opposition has been very quiet. I mean, the thousands and hundreds of thousands that came out on the street, the opposition pushed and played a role. Okay. And remember, we started this, Morgan Tsvangirai started this, Gibson Sibanda started this way back in 2009 when we formed the Movement for Democratic Change together with the trade unions, together with the student movement, together with civic society, in particular the constitutional movement. So we have been fighting for the last 17 years to see the change. That, by a twist of fate, the army had a decisive move. Doesn't change the fact that the gambit, the opening move, and the middle game was played by the people of Zimbabwe, led by the opposition. The army may have been decisive in the end game. And if you play chess, the rooks and queens can come forward, but pawns and bishops and knights would have played a role. We were the pawns, we were the knights, we were the rooks that did all the foundation work that has led to the change today.
If there were free and fair elections, firstly, are those likely, possible in Zimbabwe? And what sort of showing do you think opposition parties would get?
I think that Zimbabwe is not ready for an election right now. I think that we have to go through fundamental reforms so that the next election is credible, legitimate, and free and fair. And this is why it's so imperative that we have this interim mechanism that looks after the reforms that we have to attend to, not just in respect of institutional political reforms around electoral reform, but also the economy. You can never have a free and fair economy when people are so hungry and another section of the society can bribe them. The three drivers of electoral cheating in Africa and in Zimbabwe have been coercion, fear, and has been capture, emasculation of the state institutions, and has been corruption, outright bribery of the population by a government and a party that has access to resources. So unless we deal with those things, corruption, coercion, and capture, we will have a problem. So we need a period of reforms. How that will take long, that's for negotiation.
And looking at the economy, I mean, you were talking today about the Zimbabwean dollar falling by 70%. I mean, we get annoyed with our rand going down by 2%. You've got people who can't draw money out at ATMs. These bond notes distrusted, unemployment soaring above 90%.
95%.
How do you even start fixing an economy like that? What would you like Emmerson Mnangagwa to at least say tomorrow?
I think that in his speech tomorrow, he has to demonstrate that the military intervention and the work done by Zimbabweans on the streets was to create a better Zimbabwe and not to resolve the internal succession issues in ZANU-PF. So Emmerson Mnangagwa tomorrow must be the president of Zimbabwe and not the president of ZANU-PF. And the president of Zimbabwe will accept that he has got a huge, humongous task on his hands, which requires all hands on deck, the opposition, the church, civic society, the student movement, the youth movement. And if he has that paradigm, then our country has a starting chance. But if he thinks that this war adventures of the last 10 days were resolving ZANU-PF succession issues and ensuring that Mugabe does not form a dynasty through his wife, then he's wrong. And as a matter of fact, people will be back on the streets again, and sadly and most regrettably, tanks will be back again in the streets. It might be 5 years, it might be 8 years, but they will be back to resolve the contradictions that are so deep in our society. So we need to start on a brand new path. We need to adopt a new paradigm that it is time to put Zimbabwe first and not personal power interest, personal aggrandizement issues, personal enrichment issues. It's about saving our country. It's about making the Zimbabwean dream a reality in our own lifetimes.
What about the economy? Zimbabwe needs money. It hasn't been able to lend. I was interested that the UK today said it wants to support Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe was friends with China. who do you think Zimbabwe's friends should be? And what would you say to international investors? Lend money or wait and see what will play out?
We have to earn the trust and respect of the international community before they can start pouring their money into Zimbabwe. So we have to demonstrate that we are on an irreversible and irrevocable path to reform. So we have to produce a roadmap, a blueprint that says we are going to do this in respect of our economy. Quite clearly, we need to resort to macroeconomic stability. Quite clearly, we have to embark on major structural reforms, and the reforms are painful. Reforms are painful. There's no medicine that tastes like Fanta or a cherry plum, and that's not an accident. And Zimbabwe will have to go through that pain of austerity when it crafts and excavates under a cyclical fiscal policy. We have to bite the bullet when it comes to our currency or the current situation where we can't draw our money from the banks. If we are going to join if we're going to do the bold act of joining the Rand Monetary Union, let's do that. If we can build
Zimbabwe need its own currency again?
A currency is a function of how well your economy is functioning. So if you are not producing, and we have not been producing, we can't produce a currency. So as a stopgap measure, joining the Rand Monetary Union is a very attractive option. But of course, South Africa and the rest of the members of the Rand Monetary Union can't accept us as we are right now, because we will import into the region our own disequilibrium. So South Africa and members of the Rand Monetary Union will have to insist on fiscal convergence between Zimbabwe and the rest of these countries before we join the Rand Monetary Union. And fiscal convergence will be focused on, are we able to balance our books? Is our budget deficit, if we have to have any, less than 3% of GDP? Is our debt to GDP ratio less than 50%? Is the net present value of our exports to GDP less than 30%? Things that show that you are managing the economy well. And unless we are able to demonstrate that we are managing this economy well, no one should give us a cent, and we have to earn the right to be treated as a decent member of the international community.
We're running out of time, Mr. Biti, but finally, what would it take to get all the skilled Zimbabweans who are sitting outside their country longing to come back, to come back home?
Let's create an environment that they can come back as equal citizens. So they can come back and we put them in prison. They can come back and the banks can't lend them, cheap money for them to buy their houses. They can come back and the children the schools that the children are going to are fourth world schools. We have to create the environment for them, but they must offer intellectual advice, spiritual advice to the work that is required now in Zimbabwe.
All right, thank you so much for your appearance here tonight. That was former Finance Minister from Zimbabwe, Tendai Biti. Well, Zimbabwe